Yeah, here. I'm Tess. I'm calling from the Philippines.
And Alina.
Yes, hello.
And Alina, you're from?
Hello, I'm from Nepal. Right now at APWLD Thailand.
Perfect. So lovely to meet you. Okay, Celia, I think everybody who is least on, I've muted everyone again. Oh, I'm sorry, TT is also here. TT, I had muted you because I think there was some background noise, but you can introduce yourself. TT? Okay, well, TT is there, but she might not be able to introduce herself. So, Celia, I will hand over to you then. Oh, and Kami, sorry.
Yeah, hi everyone, it's Cami from APWLD as well.
Great. Okay, so sorry, Celia, you are muted for some reason. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Unmuted.
Good morning, and but I'm remembering, of course, that it's many different times all across the day and the evening for you all, and it's really exciting to be with you, and also very, very exciting to think about being with you next weekend in Bonn. And we have time today for myself and Ayin, who's co-facilitating the training with me, to introduce ourselves and to talk a bit together. And I want to thank those of you who took the time to fill out the survey, and if you haven't, we'll leave it open. Please do. It's very useful still. But this is a chance for us to do some thinking as a group together, some scoping and strategizing. And so, you know, we're looking at together today the goals and challenges and opportunities that there are for influencing media in at the COP and beyond, and you know, really wanting to dig in a little bit deeper on the skills that you feel like you want to build so that you can reach the vision that you all are working toward. And I know that the campaign that you all are involved in and the specific point, you know, this moment in time, this pressure point that we're in as you head to Paris are particularly important. And so the hope is to be as useful as we can with the time that we have when we're together in Bonn by learning more about specifically what your needs are today. And so if you can see the slides, I'm assuming that that's working well, but you know, we're going to take a moment to introduce ourselves, talk a little bit about goals and vision, these opportunities, skills. I'll share a little bit of the survey results as well, and we'll go a little deeper. And then next steps as we head toward the weekend, next weekend. And I know that some of you who are on the call may or may not be at the training in Bonn, and we're going to do what we can to share the materials and some of the activities that we did. We'll share our agenda with you. There may be that some of the practice and the media training, role-playing, public speaking role-playing you can do in your own community with women that you're working with there. So, you know, our hope is that, you know, if you can be with us, that's great, and if not, that you'll still get something out of the materials we're building. And this is also, you should know, this is something that Bridget and myself, and also I want to give a shout out to Claire Greensfelder, who has been thinking about this for a very long time. And I think that we've all recognized that the voices that are being heard really should be yours, should be coming from this movement, should be coming from these coalitions and campaigns. And so this is hopefully scoping not just for next weekend, but also scoping for what will happen in future trainings in the next couple of years. We want to be able to go out and find the resources, the funds, and the trainers to bring together the trainings that y'all need on an ongoing way, and I hope that can happen. And just a little bit about myself before I pass to Ayin. I'm from the United States, and I've been working in communications and media work for about, gosh, more than 20 years. Like many of you, I started as a campaigner and a community organizer, and I gravitated towards the media work because I love talking to people. And, you know, also because, to be quite honest, at the time I was doing work to protect wetlands in Southern California, which were vital to shore up our shores from the risk of rising seas, and also some of the last open space that remained in the city. And at the time, no one else wanted to do media, and that's how it started. And you should know that I approach my relationships with reporters the way I look at my relationships with people I'm organizing. They are a constituency to organize, and they have needs, they have interests, and I have always thought of myself also, you should know, as trying to create a particular psychic break inside of the corporate media. My hope has been that by being present to reporters as people and relentlessly pitching the right messengers, which are all of you, I would contend, that we can slowly break down the institutional and structural racism, classism, sexism, homophobia that exists inside of the media, especially the corporate media. And as you all know, things are incredible now with what we have with social media and citizen journalism, but we're still in a place where the big names matter. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, the big newspapers in the big cities and big rural areas in your communities. And so the question remains, can we do more, and what do you need in terms of skills and opportunities to be able to be the voices that are coming out of Paris? And my commitment to all of you, because this is a deeply personal process, this is communication, and my commitment to all of you is that being part of this process is going to help you with the mechanical skills you need to do the work, but also to build the power and the strength behind your own voice. If there's anything that holds you back, Aina and I are committed to working with you through the process so that you can feel as strong in your spokesperson and public speaking skills and writing skills as possible. And so having trained probably over 1,000 people, if you count the half-day trainings I've done, I've had the opportunity to play with many, many people, and I'm so deeply honored and grateful to get to play with all of you really soon. I'm going to pass the mic to Ayin to introduce herself and talk a little bit about her work. It's going to be the first time that she and I have worked together, so to be totally transparent, you're going to get to witness a lot of things if you're with us in Bonn next weekend, including the relative grace with which we will very quickly come to know one another and to share space, bringing you the skills next weekend. Go ahead, Ayin.
Hi everyone. So I'm Ayin. I'm calling in from the Philippines, and actually I believe I've met some of you like Tess last time, whom I interviewed for my article about women in climate. So I work for an organization in the Philippines. It's called Dakila, and what we do is we do a lot of our work through media and creative forms. Usually we do like films, theater, visual art, music, and even social media. So we try to amplify our advocacies through all these different platforms. Recently, I've also become a Climate Tracker Fellow for Adopt a Negotiator, which is the project of Global Call for Climate Action. And what we basically do is we write articles about climate issues, and we publish it to different media organizations and media platforms, both locally and internationally. So far I've published a handful of climate articles and on different angles too. So what I try to do is try to bring down the issues of climate into ways that could be understood by the public in different audiences. So yeah, and it's nice to be here with you, with everyone, and I hope to see you in Bonn next week.
So one of the things I'm realizing, it's quite a little bit imperfect in this world here. yeah, I guess if you're seeing my screen, you're going to see my private conversations in the webinar. So this is not ideal, I'm realizing. Bridget, if you have things for me, you could always text me on my phone, or else I can just...
People don't see that, Celia. It's just your screen.
Oh, they don't?
It's
Okay,
just your
fantastic.
PowerPoint.
I love that. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
This is Juliana. I just wanted to give a quick introduction. I'm here, present. Great to see all of you or hear all of you. And just before we go a bit deep,
Muted.
that if you have questions...
Sorry, Julia, I muted you. Keep going.
I just wanted to give some logistics of the webinar. So if any of the participants have questions, you all can ask them on the chat in the questions poll, in the questions tab, and I'll be answering them as Celia and Ayin present. And then also, if you have a question, you can raise your hand with the little icon that's to the left-hand side, and also on the chat. So I'll be managing some questions if you have them throughout, and just let us know if you need anything. Sorry, Celia, to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, no, thank you so much for that. The logistics are key. And what I would say is to please do use that hand raising and we can unmute, or if you want to type your question in, you can, because the idea behind the scoping is to, in terms of thinking about design and the way that I've always done my coaching and my training, and I have, a lot of gratitude for the people who first supported me as I was learning to do trainings and coaching at an international level, solidarity level, and I always love to thank my teachers and trainers and people who've helped me. And so I'll just specifically say Zipporah Berman for the work that I did with the New Health people in British Columbia, and then Atosa Sultani for supporting me as I did work through Rainforest Action Network and Amazon Watch in the Amazon. And one of the things that, after being invited, which we've been, to come and train, one of the most important things is to allow you all to share what your vision is, for what you're looking for, what you're specifically wanting, and to try to serve you as best we can. And so this next part is really an opportunity to hear from you, all of you who want to share in deeper detail about your goals and vision. And I would say it could be your goals and vision for media specifically around COP21 in Paris, but it could also be for the campaign over the next year or two. And I offer, just as we're starting to have that conversation, that when, I don't know how many of you use this, but I've found it very helpful, this idea of SMART goals, that the goals that we set together and move toward would be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And so I'd love to just hear from anyone who wants to share about, as you look at this moment, this opportunity, and we've been here before, many of you for decades have been doing this. Of course, we all had that moment in Copenhagen where a lot of the hype in the media is that this is the moment. We all know there are going to be many moments, but this is a particularly interesting one. And as you think about that and you think about what you want out of the communications work that will happen, what is it that you're hoping for? Where are you setting your sights so that Ayin and I can train our vision and align it with yours and support you next weekend? And I would say, you can put in questions or just raise hands and jump in as you care to.
I can call on somebody to be the first starter. I could start myself, if that helps us all. Also am interested in trying to think this through. This is Bridget. I guess one of the questions that I have, and it's sort of part of the agenda setting, and both in terms of a goal as well as a question about what we do moving forward. I think a goal is really about presence and amplification. I'd like to be able to make sure that in all major media, and especially anything covering climate-related news, it's not only that they're understanding the goals and the linkages, I would say, between the impacts of climate change and gender and justice, but that they also understand the really strong and sort of comprehensive narrative that women's rights groups and feminist groups who are working on these issues are bringing forward. And so even in the way that it's being covered in the media, that it's not just, you know, a sort of tidbit in the piece itself, but that it's also that there are women spokespeople and feminist allies who are being continually questioned and brought into the conversation as experts to bring in that really strong kind of comprehensive perspective that we've been all collectively working on together. So I think that's sort of what I see as a goal, and then the question, of course, is around framing, which I think that a lot of people are challenged with, of how you actually see this as a moment that is not the key moment, or is a key moment but is not the only moment, and that you build resilience and movement building kind of beyond that. So that's my kind of overview, but I'm really interested in other people's. And people can, I don't know if they can unmute themselves, but I think they can raise their hand. Huli, can you give us advice about how people can contribute?
Of course. So if you would like to contribute and participate, click the hand icon that's on the left-hand side of the toolbar.
And for people who are on the phone?
And for people that are on the phone, I believe you can do the same. Let me double check. And then you raise your hand, and a hand signal will come up on the for us, and we'll unmute you so you can talk.
And there was a question about the PowerPoint. We can definitely send you the PowerPoint, and we're also going to send all of the materials that we use. What I'll do is I'll both be offering handouts, and then I'll also do brief write-ups on how to do some of the exercises that we do next weekend, so that you're as self-sufficient in building the skills as possible. Next weekend won't necessarily be a training the trainer moment, and the materials won't be that sophisticated, but they'll be detailed enough that you can take them with you into your work. And I think it was Laura that was asking about that.
And there will also be a recording available of the webinar that we can share with everyone.
Okay, so Alina has her hand up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alina.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have a question right now. I just kind of clicked it accidentally, I think.
Well, now you're on the spot. What would you like to see in terms of either media outreach, or, you know, you in particular have been able to kind of bring a really high profile and voice to a lot of the issues being faced in Nepal. And so what would you see as a goal or something that we could achieve looking towards COP?
Yeah, one of my concern on to learn more about this training, and what would be like connecting the justice issue with the climate change, more particularly, even like, for example, in Nepal, like there are even the climate change is understood as a scientific debate so far, like planting more trees, conservation, and like going green kind of thing, but no one looks at the part of like justice part, and it looks like it will take a lot of time to understand climate change from that perspective. So how to like build the media awareness, or to bring the justice part in climate change, to how to cover the stories in that would be my interest to learn in this training. Thank you.
That's a great question, and what I'll just say as a teaser for next weekend is that the power of story, whether it's your personal story, the story of your community, or someone that you're working with as part of the campaign or in the coalitions that you work with, these personal stories that you have are the key to unlocking that. It may seem complicated and big when you speak in terms of specific examples and sharing your story, your narrative as part of the talking points rather than just the facts and figures. A number of things happen. One is women are all irresistible. You know that. You've spent time with one another. So there is a dynamism and a personality that emerges from that. But also these personal stories answer the question, how does justice relate to climate? What does climate justice mean? How do women and why are women involved in climate change should be at the forefront of the decision making. Why why are you an expert? That question is answered by your story. And Ayin, I'm blessed to have as a co-facilitator someone who has been just by instinct recognizing that the best thing to do to tell the stories of climate change is to tell personal stories. And so we're going to help you to scale the personal narrative and the community narrative and the campaign narrative from a 1 or 2 or 3 minute conversation you might have with a delegate in the hall, or build into an intervention or an op-ed that you write, all the way down to a 30-second soundbite for Al Jazeera. That's really the opportunity. And in terms of framing, you all are doing this all the time, and you're expert at doing it. We will dig in on this, and I think there are some questions to answer, but it will emerge through the activities. And the design is for things to be very, very interactive, for you to arrive, a little bit ready to go, maybe knowing what you what you want to work on, where you still have questions, but bringing some of your best thinking. And I think that a lot of the answers will already be in the room, and we can workshop anything that isn't. Other questions? Did Claire already get to ask?
Yes, Claire is sitting here with me, and it was just a test question to make sure the question pane was working.
Well, let me ask you just to make take the question a little bit deeper. You may not feel like you're necessarily ready at this moment to set a SMART goal, but I know you have a vision. All of you. It's what drives you every day. And I want to ask you to imagine for a moment the most important magazine or newspaper for you in the work you're doing. And imagine that it's a few days after Paris has concluded, and there's a headline. And there's the headline. It's above the fold, front page. There's a beautiful picture of a bunch of women doing something amazing that you've organized, a colorful display of the international solidarity that is shared around the right outcomes of Paris. And there you are, and there's a headline. What does that headline say? What has happened in Paris that is newsworthy to be on the front page above the fold? What is that vision of the best thing that you could imagine that would happen? And maybe it's just that there is a headline in a newspaper like that about Paris. That might be enough, But is there, as you think about this and what's possible, there's only a limited amount that will actually be achieved. But there is the story, and there is the idea space, and how that changes. People's hearts and minds change. When you think about that as you are moving through this process, what are you imagining? Can I put you on the spot, Ayin, and ask you the question?
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so with what I've heard so far, I believe a lot of the two questions of Bridget and the other question earlier about you know telling a story, looking at how people can cover the justice perspective and maybe even different issues surrounding climate justice and women. Like, for example, food security. A lot in the Philippines, for example, a lot of farmers are women, and food security is closely tied to women's issues and climate justice and all these things. I think I would agree with Celia when she said that there is power in stories. You would be surprised how much it is easier to explain the science of climate change when you have a human face or a human story that you can tell to other people or to your audience. So maybe I'd like to share how I've managed to do, like, how I've managed to tell stories. So like earlier, when I was only starting about, doing media work for climate, I would always be intimidated with all the data, like all the numbers and, all the political, economic things, jargons that would come up about climate. But eventually, when you find a real person experiencing climate change impacts, for example, in Nepal or in India or in the Philippines, then suddenly these numbers, these data, they have they have a face. It's a real experience, and people can relate better to that. So I guess with the opportunities presented to COP21, I think there are lots of opportunities for women to tell their stories. I mean, especially like grassroots and community stories. There are so much stories to tell, which the audience, the world, will be so much interested to hear, to watch, to listen to read. And I think it's true. We just have to, to figure out how to get these stories out, and I think it's going to be a very powerful medium.
So we're going to move now and invite you to share with us specifically some of the opportunities that you're seeing for COP21 and beyond. Again, this is, to help us think about next weekend, of course, and the training that we're doing in Bonn, but also to think about the needs that you have and the support that can be provided going forward. So Ayin, will you take us through a conversation about opportunities?
Yeah, so we were just talking earlier about the many opportunities that COP21 will present for women and climate issues. So maybe I'd like to ask a question to everyone here. What are the opportunities that you see for COP21? What do you think are the stories that you can probably tell the world and which the media will be interested in? Or how do you see yourself in the COP21 working with media?
My sense is that these are, questions that if you don't yet know the answer to, we can dig into together. But to the extent that you have a sense of what you're looking for, it will help us as we offer trainings. I know that there's some results on that we'll get to of the survey, which is interesting just to look at. But I know that some of you on the call hope to be better messengers.
Sorry, I just realized I was on mute. I just wanted to ask, there's a few people on the call that that I have some specific questions for in relation to this that I think would be interesting. I see that Michelle has her hand raised, and that's great because I actually was going to ask Michelle in particular, not necessarily just that first question, but of these questions in terms of, what does COP21 mean, or just this moment mean in terms of really as Alina put it, trying to put the human face and the justice face onto climate change, and where that could then, what we've seen as a challenge, I think, for women's organizations as a question has been in being able to mobilize resources and support to work around these issues or to make even stronger linkages. And I know a number of people on this call work on that. And then there's also just the questions around people's ability to be spokespeople within their own countries and sort of whether it works for them to do that at the national level. And I know, for example, Usha has done a lot of work at the national level on working with ministers, and I would just be interested in how you see COP21 as a chance to sort of bring that to a more amplified level. And, you know, there's other people on the call, too, who have worked on indigenous issues, for example, and how we can make sure that that is a clear part of our advocacy. So I think there's a number of different angles here. I think Tracy Mann is also on the call, and I know you've done a lot in terms of using storytelling. So I just called out a lot of people, and I would be interested really in hearing your perspectives on what you are thinking we can use this opportunity for. And how we be strategic, because part of this obviously is we want to build the skills and we want to go over what skills people need to build, but I think what we're trying to do here is set some idea of a vision and see what if we can all be on the same or a similar page in terms of what kind of messaging and what kind of reach and we would like to be having. So with that said, I'll hand over to Michelle, who had her hand raised.
Hi, hello. I'm just because one of the questions is what message and which messages needs to be amplified. And I'm just wondering if we have, because for me it's really important to write some op-eds based on information, no? Like some sound information, and we need some statistics or something like that. So I'm just wondering if we have some handout or something that can, I don't know, to unify all our statistics, and we as a group can say the same things, you know, like, I don't know, like maybe 99% of the women doesn't have access to water or something like that, you know, to be in the same line, in the same frequency, all of us. Thank you.
Great. So I think that's around sort of, and that is a question of, in terms of doing communications and outreach as a goal, is having some key set of statistics or facts that highlight some of the gender injustices of climate change. And that is a particular challenge, I think, because there's a lack of cohesive data, and so what we can do to develop that. And maybe there are others on the call who have experience with how, and this could maybe just be a question that we'll discuss further on, but how you can use data in a powerful way. Edna has her hand raised as well. Edna? You're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Edna.
Okay. I think quite a number of important aspects have been raised, but I think also as part of telling the stories in terms of gender injustices regarding climate change of women, we also need to show women also contributing to mitigating and adapting to climate change. So we need to show how, as women, we're also working to address the challenge. And this has been an experience I've seen locally, when we show the challenges as well, and we show the contributions you can make. We have had governments become more receptive to our messages. Thank you.
I don't see anyone else at the moment, Celia, so maybe I'll just hand back over to you.
Did any of the other women who were called by name want to jump in? Tracy, who were the others that you had mentioned, Bridget, that are involved in these conversations all the time?
Tracy or Usha. I think those were the two I had mentioned. But I don't see Tracy's name, so I have a feeling she might be on the phone, and I don't think we've figured out how they can contribute yet.
Well, we could just unmute everybody who's on the phone for a moment and see if they are, if they want to jump in.
Huli, if you know how to do that, please go ahead.
Of course. So if you're joining over the phone, unfortunately, there's not a feature for you to raise your hand, but you can send a message or email me directly, and we can unmute you. Or you can provide your feedback via email. And there's no other way to do it. So I'm trying to figure out a trick, unless you download the mobile app.
Could you just unmute everyone? Was just the question.
I can unmute everyone.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yep. So at this point, everyone should be
muted.
Muting everyone again because that didn't work. I think I think that there should be an unmute all button instead of just unmuting everyone individually, because if there is anyone who's on the phone who's hearing us and has something to say but can't, please do send that email to Juliana.
And I just saw in the question panel, I think Tracy has actually left the call.
Oh, okay, great.
So.
Okay, so Celia, I think we can just move forward then.
Okay, hello. Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe I'd like to ask a question as a follow-up from the last one, and from the answers earlier. I know that they've answered this in the survey, which was done, but maybe I'd like to hear more, like the challenges that that you face when it comes to talking to the media or doing media work. And I know, like earlier it was said, like about the data, getting together the key messages and probably seeing other perspectives and how to get that into the media. And maybe I'd like to know if there are any other challenges that anyone would want to share, maybe.
I see here that Lucy has her hand raised.
Yeah, that's right. It was actually about the previous section still. It was a little bit late. But actually I wanted to ask the other people involved in the webinar how they see the connection between the climate agreements and health. Because I also just received the World Health Organization's call for action to include health as a specific area in the climate agreements. And I think Women in Europe for a Common Future as an organization is also very focused on health and protecting the health, especially of vulnerable groups like young children and pregnant women. And so I would like to ask how other organizations see this connection, specifically in the Paris agreements.
I see that, am I muted? Sorry. I see that Tess also has her hand raised, as well as TT. And I think that that's really kind of a question for everybody to respond to. I know that health and well-being is a huge part of the comprehensive narrative that that sort of our collective call, at least the Women's Global Call for Justice, has part of their the call itself, but not necessarily a strong point in terms of advocacy, although lots of people are doing work on that at different levels. And so I think it's a question for everyone as to how to bring that in more strongly and strategically into the kind of the direct advocacy, if that's a piece. I'm going to unmute Tess and then Titi. Tess, you go ahead.
Hi, hello. I want to respond to Ayin's question a while ago. This is about difficulties of bringing our messages to the media. Media work is one of my major work here in the Philippines. I prepare press releases. I talk to media people and all that and those things. And um, I'm working with grassroots women. So nationally, it's really very difficult to bring in our messages to mainstream media. So in this training, I was hoping to. So Paris is a bit uh, how do you say it will be a big, very big challenge for me because nationally there are already a lot of difficulties. What more with Paris, where we will be dealing with international wires and international media organizations. So stories is just telling the stories is I heard could be an effective way of bringing in our messages. But what else? How else do we get to bring in our messages? Particularly for our network, we're trying to develop two major issues, and we would like to two issues. This is one which is related to victims of climate-related disasters, the climate refugees, and then another is women's solutions. Women's solutions has never been heard here in the Philippines. I mean, it's people don't even know if there's such a thing, or even if you talk to the media. I mean, it's not they they don't care or I'm hoping to be I'm just listening. I'm just hoping to get some ideas, some pointers from our trainers on how to how to address or how to face these kinds of challenges that I usually encounter doing my work with media. So thank you.
So there are some other questions. I think a bunch of other people have their hand raised, so I can just maybe call on Natalia. You're unmuted.
Yes. Hi, good morning, everyone. I work with Madre, and we partner with Edna and other colleagues, Indigenous Women's International. Internationally, I wanted to also raise one of the challenges for us in terms of communication. We have been doing a lot or tried to do a lot around the storytelling and bringing the solutions, as Edna was saying, highlighting the solutions from women, in particular Indigenous women around the world. But one of the things that we face this summer doing more research and trying to also think about strategically about our program has been what can be some of the policies or governments or solutions that we could be pointing out to kind of identify one of the one representation of a good policy or one representation of what one experience that has been very positive in terms of including the grassroots women to the decision-making processes, etc. And I think the challenge for maybe some of the colleagues that are doing this work in different contexts might be able to point out, like, what can we be looking at as an example of this is really what we're hoping to see more. In particular, we were looking at the example of Kenya, there is a lot of commitment from the government, and there's a lot of mobilization from civil society. And we were also trying to talk to partners about what is, one example of a good policy in place or a good program that you could be highlighting, that kind of, it's not, per se perfect, but it's kind of embedded some of the values and some of what we are looking for to see. I know we're talking about COP, and the agreement is such a big push at this moment, but I also feel like if we come from the local and we could be pointed out, yes, the solutions of the women, but also try to identify some policies that could show us the way and what do we really envision, would be, like to start talking about, okay, we envision this, and this is the example, and, and identify maybe if there is such a case, one policy, one program that will show us, a championing on gender and climate change that we want to really highlight. And maybe it's a way of connecting to a bigger message and to the mainstreaming media. And I will echo what Edna was saying, that it's not just about injustices, which, yes, definitely we need to talk about it, but also the contributions of the women. I think working in some particular stories, right, and how that happened, and what what needed to happen, and how the women find a way of influencing a policy or doing a particular solution to mitigate climate change at the local level could be also very useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Natalia, sorry. Titi, you're unmuted.
Hello?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the question on health. And I saw the press release also. And I'm wondering whether we have any points around gender, health, and climate change. If we could put something together, some of those things we could advocate around. But I'm not too sure whether it's too late in the day, because when I look at the negotiating text, there's practically nothing on health issues, and we know that the issue of health is very, very important when we're talking about the impacts of climate change on the ground. And based on some of the results, or some of the write-up in the IPCC, we have some health impacts and how it's going to affect children, vulnerable people, young people, and so many other things like that. So I'm wondering if we are going to be releasing most of our messages and be using the media to really amplify most of our messages. Is it not really important at this particular point to also find a point around climate change and health, and if we need to mainstream it within our gender advocacy issues? So I'm just wondering, maybe we could think along that line, then we can be able to respond to the WHO call, and then we'll be able to do a lot of advocacy within the negotiations, and perhaps it could work, and then we can have some face of health issues within the negotiations.
So maybe just you. Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've had several, over the last several years, we've had many side events on gender and health and climate change, and there has been work on health and climate change by the WHO. I think that rather than maybe discussing really specifics in terms of advocacy, because we'll do that in terms of thinking about technical advocacy strategy for the negotiations separately, and there is a challenge at this point to introducing language that hasn't been advocated for in the past. Although there are countries who are pushing health that haven't strongly for the first time, but I think that maybe we can leave that as a sort of separate conversation. There's certainly a way that we can, if it's not through text, there's certainly a way that we could make this a central point and use the media to kind of outreach on it and to make it a huge part of campaigning as well. But I think that we can discuss that a bit more in depth. I'm going to give it to Usha, and then I have a challenge. I think the question of what the challenges are for media outreach that we are facing is a really good one to set up for what skills we would like to build and to get some initial insights into what skills we should have, or some tips that we should start thinking about. So I'm just going to give to Usha, and I think,
She's in.
did someone
Thank you,
unmute?
Bridget.
Oh yes, go ahead, Usha.
Yeah. As Tess said, we also do a lot of work at the grassroots level. And we have found that when we do in different centers across the country, we manage to get media attention in the local media, in the local language. But the challenge is when we want to highlight our issues in the national media, especially with regard to gender. Nowadays, there is a lot of attention in the national media on climate change and especially COP21. But to get our messages into the national media in a big way is a challenge that we face here. Local media, of course, gives a lot of coverage to our events and the issues that we raise at these events. So right now we are making an effort to put it at the national level by having a national event in relation to our global call. So I would be interested in knowing what strategies we could use to get more attention at the national level.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks for that.
I just wanted to share my own challenge that I'm really facing and what I'm really hoping to get out of further trainings and further kind of cohesive thinking around this. I feel that we do a lot in terms of putting stories and messages out of good policies and best practice which work for gender just outcomes, and that we've held several, alongside specific policy spaces, we've held several events, whether they be speak outs where women are sharing the stories of both the injustices that they're facing, the solutions that they have, and really challenging from a comprehensive justice narrative about the need for, not just language or policies, but for real change in certain different sectors. We've provided examples and tried to really emphasize the storytelling element, because a lot of the work on gender advocacy and from a women's rights perspective is putting a human face to climate change. And every time I talk to media people, this is what they say they want to see. And yet, for some reason, it's still not permeating the mainstream media. We're still not, and I think part of it is lack of maybe the resources and connections that other mainstream environmental and climate groups have when it comes to who is asked to be spokespeople on climate issues in the major media outlets. And it's also perhaps something that we're not considering enough when we plan our events and we plan our activities at the international level. I think, as said here, there's a lot of successful national work that's done in terms of hosting press conferences and getting profiled in their own language at the national level, but then getting that to permeate into the international level messages, where I'm at least finding challenge to, except for when the connection is there and is easy, and then usually journalists and other media are very open to hearing the kind of stories, solutions, and impacts that we have to share. And so I think that there's a lot of sort of understanding what connections we need to be making, what relationships with certain media outlets we could have that would really highlight these issues that we're all working on, and how to just effectively make sure that when we are, we plan a lot of gatherings and a lot of speak outs, if you will, to share these messages, to share our narratives, and don't necessarily make effective use. I think some organizations do it really, really well. And so how can we share those skills and have some sort of, okay, these are the key things that we're going to do as we approach COP, but also how we continue to keep this conversation going beyond Paris. I think there's a lot of challenges for me, and just in terms of permeating that level of media outreach.
Thanks for that, Bridget. I want to offer some specific sharing here, some skills and some tools that might help to answer some of these questions. And I first off want to thank everybody who shared. So the things that you've offered, I think, are Absolutely fantastic. Pardon me, I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, so which I plan to be totally healthy by next week. So pardon me if I'm a little raspy this morning. I'd like to speak for a minute about this question of nationalizing a local story. And I think that there's a couple of things that I've seen that have worked. And actually, these are all things that you all are probably actively engaged in. It's just a question of sort of how you go about it. I do notice that TT has a hand up. Do you want to jump in, TT, before I respond to some of these questions?
Yes, yeah, my question is this. I've been listening to everybody on how to get the local media to actually amplify most of the things you want to put into the media. And I can talk about what happens here in Nigeria. We find it that a lot of people don't understand what happens at the international level. And to make them understand it, how gender justice and climate change operates at the international level and how it concerns them, it's a bit difficult. So it means that we have to actually mainstream it into local issues for people to really understand it, and then the local media will begin to carry it out. We don't have much problems with the local media carrying most of our messages, having interviews. In several occasions they have called me for interviews and I've been able to explain and things like that. But as an advocate, you really need to be able to mainstream local issues into international issues so that people at the local level will be able to understand what you're saying and how it resonates with them. Then what is in the international agreements that will resonate with the local level is very, very important, because if you tell them I'm going to COP21, we're going to have a climate change agreement, for God's sake, the local people ask, how does it concern me? So for me, I've been able to find a way to mainstream what is being said at the international level to fit into our local circumstances so that people can understand why it is necessary for us to continue to follow the negotiations at the international level. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And TT, in a way, you've just spoken to the flip side of what some of the other women on the call have been talking about. So localizing a national or international story and nationalizing or internationalizing a local story. And we'll talk more about this in the training, but here's a couple tools I just want to offer you to be thinking about as you go. For those of you who've been doing media for a while, you probably have heard this, but there's, you know, when we think about what the messages are, sometimes I've heard a template of, you know, problem, solution, action. Another one that I really like, though, that I think is really useful here is the idea of what, so what, now what? And we have to answer the essential question, why should I care? And I think that there's a couple things to offer. TT, you're in luck if you've got somebody who's already interested in you locally. If you are, or if any of your individual activists, your organizations, or your campaigns locally are getting traction and getting media, then you're already a story locally. How do you nationalize or internationalize the story? Here's a couple of ways. You physically going to Paris suddenly makes the local story international. If the lens through which the journalist continues to tell the Paris story is your story, and you call in and do dispatches on the radio, or you call in and you know, or you ask if you can write a blog or a column, or they, you know, interview you every day, or you send one picture a day, that takes the story which is local, the story of you, your organization, your campaign, your solutions, your working policies, and now is, okay, we're on the road with those and we're taking them to Paris. A lot of times these are stories you have to ask for. You have to ask for the story, ask for the order is what they would say in sales. And I think that this is where a lot of us fall short, is because we are so busy doing the work, which is good work, that we don't actually, or perhaps we're modest and being humble, you know, but we don't actually take that extra step to proactively call. So anybody who's been covered in a local paper, local radio station can call and say, guess what? You've been interested in what we did before. Now we're hitting the road. We're going to Paris. We want you to tell that story of Paris, which is this big thing that nobody really necessarily is that interested in, or doesn't, you know, can't get their head around, through us. Can we do that? Can we provide you content every day? Will you call us every day and interview us? Can we do a 3-part series on these 3 things, you know, climate and health, or the story of you know, three things that relate to the work that you're doing on the ground. And we are also, you know, and I just know that although I'm going there, I'm not alone. I'm part of dozens, hundreds of women who have been doing this work. We're part of an international network. I'm seeing myself, you know, I'm placing myself in that moment in the reporter's mind in the context of something larger. They know you're amazing on the ground. They've covered your story. The secret they need to hear from you, which they may not know, is that you're also traveling and among a series of other superstars from around the local areas who are coming together in this national or international opportunity. And so asking for that, specifically calling and saying, how can we support you in being better at your climate coverage or at your, you know, women and gender issue coverage by dispatching and telling you stories from Paris. If the idea is to go from local to national, oftentimes 3 is a great number, but 2 can be enough. If you're doing something in your community that's getting local media, and there's one other community group whose work you admire that is in this area of climate at the large level, or even more specifically like water or the various things that you're working on, one other group in some other part of the country, be in touch with them if you're not already. You probably are. You do amazing coalition work already. Most of you are in touch with others across your country. 2 of you come together, do a joint pitch, a joint press release, and joint press calls to the national outlet, saying, look, this is a trend. This is the leading edge. This is, you're watching the, you know, you want to tell the story no one's telling. This is the future. We're over here in the northern part of the country doing this and this. Our brothers and sisters in the South are doing this and this. What we have in common is, and that's where you find that meta message, that common umbrella, that frame that you put around these 2 stories. The big story you could tell, national newspaper, in the lead up to Paris, which you better be covering with more than just your Associated Press feed, you know, is the story of the work that is happening across the country, from the north to the south. Here's 2 great examples. And 2 is sometimes all they need. They don't need to know that 47% or 63% of women across your country are doing XYZ. 2 examples of it from different neighborhoods, different communities can be enough to take a local story and make it national. In the other direction, the international story to the local, you know, we've talked about this idea of you know, the local media being interested in the larger story, and they see it through the lens of, through the eyes of you as a woman going there, you know. Now, if there's 2 or 3 of you from the country going, suddenly now there's a story that your regional and national papers might be interested in as well. There are also, of course, issue and policy things that will affect you. There are many of you who will be affected by red. And it may be that the thing to do is to call that local reporter who has been interested in you, for those of you who are lucky enough to have local reporters who've covered what you've done, and say, hey, I know the UN thing looks, you know, very large, there's a lot going on. Let me tell you the 2 or 3 ways that what is decided in Paris is going to directly affect our lives on the ground here. You make it real for people. That why should I care? The so what? And if you can take something complicated like the step-by-steps of the negotiations around RED or around any other of the pieces, and help people to see how it comes alive in their life through story, now suddenly the reporter has a hook. That's what they're looking for, a peg. The idea that they need something to hang the story on. They need a reason. Because what happens, of course, when they get off the phone with you is they turn around to their editors, their producers, the managers of their news institution, and they have to answer the same questions. What? So what? Now what? Why should I care? You know? And so if you can help them to shape those stories, and I think that a lot of times part of where we as women, but you know, anybody who's pitching a story could do this, but I see us as women doing this more than we should. There are many arrogant men who pitch stories who don't have this problem. This is part of our healing as women, but a lot of us imagine that our relationship with reporters is such that we wait until we're asked a question, we speak when we're spoken to, you know, that our job is to fit into a box that they've come to us with. So they come to us with a blank spot in the newspaper, and we cram our little selves inside of there. The difference is there's a real proactive opportunity here for you to sit with a reporter, and if you can talk with them and say, you know, there are dozens of ways that you can cover Paris through the stories of our women who are going to Paris. There's this, there's that, there's this, there's that. Are you interested in this? Are you interested in that? What about health? Did you see that press release? You know, if you want to talk about health, we could do some pieces around that. You know, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're already doing locally. So, you know, and this idea that I think it was Natalie Caruso was making is a great point about the idea of solutions and policies that you have locally and regionally that are scalable. And what I would say is, again, this can become part of your message or meta messages that you are using. And there'll be times, hopefully, that some of the women will be speaking in a chorus, that if you're covered in the Philippines or you're covered in France or you're covered in Nigeria, that there are certain aspects of what you all are saying that sound very similar, but you also will each have your own story, your own window in to these issues, and there'll be unique needs regionally and nationally that need to be spoken to in your messages, you know. But this idea of looking for statistics is a good one, but also this idea of focusing on solution stories and policies that have worked that could be scaled is another good one. The overall point that you speak in united is great, and what you'll find, and we'll break this down in some of the materials that I'll share with you, make sure that get out to all of you over the next week, is as you're crafting your messages, there are certain parts that are very unique to you, and then there are going to be things that you are saying together. And the idea is to speak, and I don't know how many of you do this, but the other thing that helps is to speak to the journalists themselves and ask them what they need. I will literally say to a reporter, what do you need to get your editors to say yes on this? And they'll tell me, I need an us versus them story of a David and Goliath struggle that's, you know, where against all odds a woman has overcome, you know, near death to get to the place, you know, and it's dramatic and it's crazy. And I will try to help them reshape some of that narrative. But I will also think about it and say, oh, okay, yeah, we have that, you know. We need things that are scandalous. We need things that are dangerous. We need things that are life and death. Yeah, we have all of that. Let me tell you about how the work that we're doing fits into that, and also is a story of resilience and a story of possibility, even in the face of that. And so that's, you know, that speaks to the local, national, and there's other things I can say on that, but if people have questions or want to follow up, Ayin, I don't know if you want to throw anything in on this question of sort of making the story come alive at different scales before we move into a couple other topics. Do you want to jump in at all, Ayin?
Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute my mic. Yeah, so I know that it's quite difficult to actually get international and even international news, especially I think if you're coming from a developing country with such limited, I don't know, resources, networks, and you know, very rarely tapped to do some interviews. But I think it's also a great opportunity right now to be able to, as Celia said, proactively reach out to these media, because sometimes they they are waiting for these stories, and they are waiting to have a good story to be pitched to them. And believe it or not, like editors and media practitioners, a lot of them are actually very responsive if you are able to effectively pitch your story to them. So I think this is also like going into what skills need to be trained or honed. I think pitching should be part of this. I think a lot of, from what I heard earlier, like how do I get my story to be heard? Do I get grassroots and community stories to go to national media or international media even, how do I get interviewed? A lot of it is actually reaching out proactively, pitching to media, looking for media platforms, and it is a lot of work, but it will be worth it. And I think Paris is a good opportunity for that, for women to be able to speak out, have the confidence to talk to a media person or email this editor and say, hey, I have this story. Why don't you listen to us and publish it or show it to, like, in your media platform. So yeah, I guess there's a lot of work to be done because there are a lot of opportunities that we have.
The other thing I'll just mention is that in every step, as those of us who do media, every step of the way, the most important question that we carry, that we hold in our hearts, is the why. And if you feel like, I need to get international coverage, stop and step back as a group and sit with each other and ask the question why. And this is why I always start with goals. And I'll share more in the tools that I offer. One of the things that we talk about is the game, and it's, goals, audience, message, engagement, and I'll send a bunch of information on this. The reason why we often start with goals is people will say all the time, we have to be in the international paper. In the United States, when Oprah had a show, I must have heard 10,000 times, we have to be on Oprah. When Twitter first started, we have to be on Twitter. The question that you always want to be asking is why. And you may find that the international coverage is not nearly as important. Once you think about power, mapping influence, how you're going to get your needs met, how you're going to create the conditions for the world to change as your vision is hoping that it will, you may not need the international coverage. You may just need much more solid local coverage so that a particular set of people are reached by that message. So, what we're striving for, I think, will be a question that's, for a movement, you'll have some answers, and as individuals, you'll have some answers. And I want to encourage all of you. I've got a couple of pieces as we, begin to start to wrap up. I want to encourage you, each of you, to start to write a dream list of places where you want coverage and answer the question why. So if your national newspaper is on that list, or a particular radio show or a particular television show, a news program, you make the list. Oh gosh, it would be so great for our campaign if we got coverage in here, 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 here. Make that list. We want to see your dream list. The way that we make it real is we've got to write it down. We want to see the list of the places you believe are the most strategic and the most important to get coverage, and then answer the question why, so that we know, okay, yes, it is imperative that that Nigerian story get to the national level or get Pan-African coverage, and here's why. And then you move from there into moving that media outlet and the talking with that reporter to the top of your list. And when we unpack more about pitching, and we can do, we can look at other opportunities to do some of these training pieces over webinar. There'll be some follow-up materials for people that aren't in Bond. But this idea of starting with the list of the dream places you want to be and really understanding why will then help you. Because sometimes it's not a question of whether you've got the skills, it's a question of, is this the right story at the right time in the right place? And if the answer is yes, then the skill you have to develop is that opportunity, that ability to convince the reporter that that's the case. But sometimes it isn't. I'm noticing that Bridget has a question, so go ahead, Bridget.
Thanks. No, I think that actually what you just said spoke a lot to what I was thinking about was, I think that so much of what you've just said has been really important and imperative for us to be thinking about, and that question of why, because I think you're right, we come into a lot of these, and even, coming into this of wanting to amplify and wanting to have outreach into all these spaces and actually having a more cohesive and a goal-setting approach to it in terms of what kind of normative shift we'd like to see and where we really need to be. Because one of the questions I had in terms of challenges is I fully see and agree that part of it is not being boxed into a story, but developing the story and doing a lot more in terms of pitching and kind of demanding the stories to be heard. And one of the challenges I struggle with is knowing who that is anymore, because I don't think, just like we don't have any normal relationships between states and citizens and countries to countries, there's not really a sort of normal relationship between journalists and civil citizens anymore. There is so much more in terms of, does it make sense to be on, a TV show, or to have a YouTube series that'll reach hundreds of people, or to do something over social media, or to host a podcast? There's so many outlets, there's so many individuals that have influence that are not necessarily traditional journalists, and I often find myself really struggling with having something like a press release and not knowing what to do with it, or where to send it, or even if writing it was the most impactful thing that should have been done, or if it would have been more impactful to just put up a picture. And I think part of this goes back to not necessarily always asking the question of what the goal is in terms of maybe changing the conversation or shifting normative languages. So I'd be really interested in if there is some sort of, checklist that you've developed or that you can think of how, when you want to get a message out there, and this is sort of an advocacy strategy as well, but really specifically when it's about translating a message into the mainstream, what goal questions you could ask yourselves, and then kind of then leading to the how. But you kind of just articulated that yourself, because that was the question that I had.
Yeah, I mean, and the 5-minute media training is always involves the game, which I just posted in the chat, this idea of goals, audience, message, engagement. And I would even put 2 M's in the word game and add messenger. If you know what you need to do and you know what you want in that moment, then the questions, well, the old school question back in the day was, what do I want? Who can give me what I want? That can be your audience or your target, the policymaker, whoever it is you're trying to influence. And then the old school question was, what do they read, watch, and listen to? In today's day and age, we want to know who they follow on Twitter and Instagram, whether or not they're on Facebook, if you're organizing it, there's what church do they go to, what community groups are they a part of, who will they listen to, who are they accountable to, those kinds of organizing questions come in. And the great thing about this work is that you all are amazing organizers and you're amazing campaigners. You do this work already, and many of the answers for doing media are not big mysteries. They're really rooted in at this intersection of campaigning and organizing. And this is why I like to approach thinking about building relationships with reporters in the same way that I'm looking to organize, because it gets me right away thinking about what is my goal in organizing with these people. For me, for example, we in the United States, we're doing international solidarity work with groups from Amazon countries who were trying to stop clear-cut logging and deforestation in the Amazon. And when we started doing this work to be allies for those in the South, we knew that we needed to find a way to have an impact on the logging companies, and we wanted to have an impact on build relationships with the loggers themselves. And this was the early days of the the late 90s of this blue-green alliance, where labor, specifically loggers and environmentalist activists, were coming together in conversations and in solidarity in ways they hadn't before. And once we realized that that's what we were doing, we could breathe a sigh of relief that we didn't need to be in the newspapers in Quito necessarily. We didn't necessarily need to be in the Miami Herald or the New York Times. We needed to be in these very strange little newsletters and blogs that the loggers themselves were reading, because we wanted to, or we wanted to be in the financial companies' newsletters. We wanted to be in the places where people rated the logging companies for their profitability, to influence who would invest in them or not, And so it was very specific media outlets to reach a very specific audience. And so it gave us the chance to breathe a sigh of relief, and our media could be focused in a different in a different way. We're getting ready to wrap up, and I know some of you have a call coming up at the top of the hour, and I want to leave a little room for Ayin to close us out, but I want to just share a couple things. One of the things that's particularly was mentioned by you, Bridget, was this idea about the lack of connections or accessibility to reporters. And this is a place where we need to heal privilege in our movement. And what I would say is any of you who have ever worked with an organization that you think has good media lists or does good media work, whether that's a VOZ or 350 or Rainforest Action Network or whoever they are, think about reaching out to them. If they've ever reached out to you, or even if they haven't, if you see them getting covered and you see their name in the news, you would guess that they know the lay of the land for the media, now is the time for you to reach out to them and ask for them to check their privilege. Ask for them to be in solidarity with you in one of the most powerful ways they can, which is to share their news contacts, their reporter contacts. So if a media list is a problem or a challenge for you, and at the larger coalition level, this is a challenge for us, and so we want to make sure that this happens so that we have some good lists. Reach out to those people and say to them two things. One, will you share your media list? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But even more importantly, we want to challenge. We are such and such an organization. We're such and such a coalition of women. We have a challenge for you. Every time the phone rings between now and Paris, and you are being asked to be quoted for a story, we want to challenge you to include us in the story. You know our stories are important. You know our voices are important. You know the work we're doing is so powerful. We want to challenge you to say to that reporter, you know, I'm not the right person for this story. You should really think about calling Titi. Or, you know, yes, we'll be quoted for this, but I really think that you might want to consider speaking to Natalie, because they also have so much to share. And if every single person who has the privilege of having those connections and the accessibility to those reporters and the media people doing media was to have your back and to support you by pushing you forward, and then also you're calling, maybe even for the first time, or someone's calling on your behalf, maybe for the first time, the reporter starts to have a number of different fingers are pointing toward you as the person who could be a good voice. That is what real allyship looks like. That's what solidarity looks like. Ask for it as you move forward on your media. One of the things I want to ask you to do, if you're willing, to think ahead before Bonn, or even if you're not coming to Bonn. One is to make your dream list of the coverage that you'd like to have, like I was talking about earlier. But the other is to come thinking about this combination of these four things. And to whatever extent you can prepare in advance, even if it's just thinking about where you want to focus your work, where you need more time to think, but there's these four pieces. There's what you say, and I'll tell you what, we put so much emphasis on all of it. We've talked a lot about it today, and it's important. But the weird thing is, and we're sensory animals, us humans, so take this for what it is, but how you look while you're saying it, how you sound while you're saying it, and probably even most importantly, how it feels to be you, how you feel grounded in your body while you're saying what you say, those three matter shockingly more than the specific nuances of what you say. All four of them are important. What do you already know from all the experience that you have about these four areas that you can come and share with the women who will be with us in Bonn, or that you can share? We'll open some Google Docs or use some other ways to share information, whether it's sharing statistics and messages specifically, or sharing things you do to prepare yourself before you go on stage to speak to a group. We'll share all the skills and tools that we're going to bring to the training. But what can you bring already in these four areas, and where do you personally want to set goals for your own growth in the next week before Paris and in the next year, so that if we had a chance to meet one another a year from now, I could say to you, how did it go? You set some goals for yourself around really improving the way that you present and the specific skills, as well as thinking strategically about the message and what you're saying. How is that going for you? So I really just want to offer you the challenge. We desperately need to know what your vision is of the dream list of coverage you'd like to see. And I would love it if as many of you as possible want to play with this with us, to really think about these 4 areas. What can you share with the women on the call? And what do you need help specifically on? What are you bringing in that you need support around? So with that, I want to offer back to Ayin to close us out, and I know Bridget probably has a few closing thoughts after that. Ayin, go ahead and take us out, if you will.
Okay. So, well, thank you to everyone who attended this webinar, and thank you for those who shared their thoughts earlier about, what challenges they face and what do they think they need to do in in Bonn and in Paris. And I think I would have to agree with Celia when she said that we all need to think about our goals, what we want to do, and how do we think we can get there. And maybe I'd also like to add to that and say, think about the impact that you are potentially going to make with your work, with your advocacies, and and it's not just about getting national or international coverage, as Celia said earlier, but try to think about who you want to talk to and what messages you want to tell them and where it is best to talk to them. So not all media platforms are created equal, and we all have to think about the most, where the most impact we can make. And so, we all have potentially big impacts in our communities, internationally or in our countries nationally. And it's a good way to think about when we also set our goals, our personal goals, and what we want to achieve in Bonn and in Paris.
Thank you, Ayin. Thank you, Celia. I think this was really excellent in terms of being our kind of deep dive scoping session to not only prepare for the Bonn session, which I think it's great that many of the people on this call will be able to be there to go in depth into skills building, but then also that everyone who's registered for this, we will definitely, as Celia said, try to create some documents, share some tools coming out of this. There's very little time before COP, but we thought it was really important to try to make space to not just jump into, okay, this is going to be our messaging and our strategy, without really taking a few steps to explore, what our personal goals are, what